The part of me that likes to teach is excited because I thought that we would have a big group, and I felt like we wouldn't have time to have depth. So I'm just loving that we get to slow down. And also thank you for starting with heart. I have a mentor named Roger Fernandez, and he's from the Lower Elwha Klallam tribe. And one of the things that Roger taught me is that you let your heart inform your head, and that when your head is trying to inform your heart, it doesn't quite work the same. So I think we're starting with circuitry. I mentioned that you'll see in a minute why I was smiling when the squirrel came in, because my background is in museums and libraries. So when I think about reparations as a body of knowledge, I think everyone has a gift that they could bring to the welcome table of reparations. And I wanted you to kind of consider yourself as someone who's being invited to the welcome table of reparations. So in this workshop, we are going to talk about the advocacy that led to Washington State's first reparations study. That happened much faster. We had a roadmap. When I joined SAARC in 2024, we had a roadmap that thought that we would start city, county, state. And in 2022, we went to the city of Seattle, and this was prior to me, so I'm just sharing stories that have been passed down to me. But we went to the city of Seattle and asked, could there be a reparations program? And we were told that there was a deficit at the city, and that with that deficit, that it wouldn't be ideal to try and do reparations work. That did make sense to me. I did rapid response work with the Department of Health for Washington State. So I did a project that actually collected feedback from BIPOC rapid responders. And at the time I was working, I had just stopped working at the city of Seattle. And I realized just how much had slowed down because federal monies had ended for COVID recovery. And cities and counties and the state were all kind of reeling because we were not having federal support. I'm pretty sure it's not lost on you all that federal support is even likely less now, which is why when we did our legislative session for the Washington State study, one of the things that our local representative, Chapalo Street, said was, it's a small miracle that we got that $300,000 for the reparations study. I'm gonna pass out, I think actually there's enough so each of you can have one. So.
Thank you. And the reparations study that you're referring to,
yeah, yeah, there's an RFP that's out. And I want to be clear, and I'm trying to slow down because I feel like there's an interpreter, so I don't want to overload her.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. The Washington State Reparations Study, it's authored by the Washington State Commission on African American Affairs. They are the group that's commissioning the study. The fiduciary partner is the Washington Department of Commerce. So they're the ones that put out the RFP. They will cut the check. But I believe it is the CAAA that is the authority that will be selecting the research team. Francis, when you mentioned Liberation Ventures, you made me smile because we've actually been in conversation with them. They're partners with one of our national partners, First Repair. So if you look at the handout with the woman who has the braids, this is Robin Ruth Simmons. She's the former alderwoman of Evanston, Illinois, who started the first cash reparations program in the US. But do each of you all have an acorn in your hand?
I'm sorry?
Do each of you have an acorn in your hand? Did everybody get an acorn? Did you get a chance to kind of feel it and notice it? One of the things that I like about acorns is they're really wonderful tools for imagining systems change. In reparations work, the thing that I often have to remind myself as the executive director for SAARC is that big things come from small things. So think about the last time you saw an oak tree. The technology of an oak tree lives inside an acorn, right? But the technology of an oak tree is self-propagating, right? So there's cycles. The reason why you're able to hold these acorns in your hand is because I was like, I'm looking for a metaphor. When we're teaching, how do we have the right metaphor? So I want you all to think of reparations as planting seeds of change that propagate over generations and is as durable as an oak tree would be, or a forest of oak trees. So you get to keep these. Nature's generous, so I keep having more teaching tools, so you can keep this as a reminder of the conversation we had today at the Reparations Dream Lab. But I also wanted to bring in the natural world, because when I'm training and sharing, educating, organizing, or mobilizing for reparations, I want people to feel inspired, and I also want people to feel imaginative. And I would like us to think of reparations as being natural and inevitable. So in nature, there are cycles, right? The sun comes up. We live in Seattle, and we may not see it all the time, but it comes up. There's cycles in our life. We live in a place that's pretty deciduous, so we kind of have a demarcation between winter, spring, summer, and fall. For reparations advocacy, our rhythm, our natural rhythm, is at the beginning of the year. We're normally getting ready for MLK and Black History Month at this time of the year. And so we're preparing for the first quarter of next year. We had a long legislative session this year. So in 2025, the odd years are longer. And then going into the even years, in 2026, we have a shorter session. This session was my first legislative session. And the thing that I learned this year was, one, I'm going to be a lot nicer to my elected officials because they have a grueling gauntlet of things that they have to do. That's one. And then two, Black civic leadership in Washington State. I want to choose my words thoughtfully. I think we kind of have a moth hole in our Black civic leadership fabric because most of our civic leaders are in their 70s and 80s. So I feel very indebted to my elders for the Washington State study. If they did not act in an assertive way, we would not have the study. But this is also a year I lost my father. He died at 78. And so when I'm hanging out with elders who are doing the work of people who are younger than them and who hold a lot of wisdom, a lot of movement strategy is, how do we build an intergenerational movement? How do we build an intersectional movement? And how do we build a radically inclusive movement so that when we dream of reparations, we can dream of Black families that are housing insecure. Not just Black families who can't buy homes, but Black people who maybe are at threat of losing their homes. For Black children who are going to schools where they might be overpunished or tracked for the school to prison pipeline. Those are all things that we're thinking about. And in order to do this work well, we have to resist a notion that when I got to Olympia, one of the things that I was warned about is typically there's only like one person who's selected to lead. And in the reparations stakeholder world that I live in, we learned we needed an ecosystem. So some of the reasons why I'm bringing you things like acorns, and in a minute I'm going to show you a Jericho rose, is for us to imagine what would it look like for us to have an ecosystem of reparations advocacy that includes Black leaders, of course. We're building a coalition, and it has Black leadership, but who else do you think we could imagine would be part of the reparations ecosystem? What would we need in our ecosystem for us to grow strong oaks with good acorns? Who else needs to be at the table? I love all the wry smiles in the room. What's making you smile like that?
Everyone.
Say more. When you say everyone, who are you seeing?
Yeah, I think if we are transforming our society where we've healed historical harms, everybody benefits from a society where we're all able to live our joyful lives. So that's why everybody needs to be in the everybody benefits.
I love that. So you're thinking the general public. Are you thinking elected officials?
Oh, absolutely.
Are you thinking policymakers?
Sure.
Are you thinking young people, elders, families? So those are things that SAARC is holding, particularly at a time where the teaching of U.S. history and Black history in particular, which I would probably argue is U.S. history, it's not pertinent to Black people alone, is the history of how this country was made. We're living in a time where, the federal government is taking down exhibits at the Smithsonian. We're lucky that there's a group called Who We Are who's actually documenting the items that were taken out of the Smithsonian. I'm really happy that we have Jeff Robinson on our board doing that kind of work. That makes me feel, as someone with a background in museum and libraries, a little bit like I have more faith in this moment. I'm gonna do a little transition and check time, but the next thing that I'm gonna bring out in the Reparations Dream Lab is a Jericho rose. Does anybody know what a Jericho rose is? Lexi, do you want to say what a Jericho rose is?
I mean, I don't know what their official plant uses for. I practice an African traditional religion. We use them as like a vessel to connect with your ancestors. They come dry like this in this form, and then you put them in a bowl of water, and when they're hydrated, they expand to like a very beautiful, living, flourishing. It looks like a flower, which is why they're called Jericho roses, I think. In African traditional religious practices, they hold a lot of sacred energy because they don't require to be rooted in the ground. They live and exist, and as you add different elements, they endure and survive.
I'm definitely recruiting you, Lexi. I'm recruiting you. I love tag teaming with you. So the part of me that used to teach, I feel like we're sensuous beings. We tend to learn through experience. So I wanted you to get a chance to hold what a Jericho rose was. And then I also wanted to give you a context, because I'm going to switch towards the slide deck a little bit, but I want us to kind of stay in the analog world more than the digital world for a lot of different reasons. But what we're going to do with this Jericho rose is submerge it. And as we're submerging it, we're going to have like a formal presentation where I walk you through my slide deck. I wanted, at the very least, for you all to know that SAARC is evangelical, not in the Christian sense of it, but evangelical in we're each one teach one organization. So if you connect with us, we want you to stay connected with us. And we also want you to know that in order for reparations to have everybody, then everybody in this room would share out after they left this room, so that you would be able to say, hey, I did a Reparations Dream Lab with SAARC. And you should try and check one out if you see it again, because you'd learn some things about how to imagine repair. So with that said, I'm just gonna open the water. And I loved what Lexi said about Jericho roses. I learned about Jericho roses during the pandemic. So I'm giving this just like a good strong drink of water. What I like about Jericho roses is that they're considered objects that can feel like a blessing when you rehydrate it. So we'll talk for a little bit. We'll probably talk for about 20 minutes. And I don't know if our rose will open, but we should begin to see some transformation in this Jericho rose. So I'll lift it up, but I'm gonna leave it in the middle of the room because I like that we get to be in circle with one another. But before I get to the slide deck, just to provide some thoughtfulness about looking at the Jericho rose, a lot of times when we're thinking about reparations with Black community members, when I talk about research studies, I clarify that a reparations research study isn't to be anthropological with Black communities. So it's not to study Black communities for our deficits or to pathologize us. That is not the point of a harm study. It's actually on a scientific level, much more interesting. A reparations harm study, when done well, would be looking at the mechanisms and methodologies that produce disparity for Black communities. So when we're thinking about that Jericho Rose, if we were imagining systems that actually are not vibrant enough to help everybody thrive, how would they transform? What would we do differently in our systems if they were actually designed so that everyone could thrive? So it's a little bit, for some people, a little bit of a shift. Others might have already been there, but it's a little bit of a shift to go from harm studies are not to study Black people. They're to study our government, our policies, to understand what is it about these mechanisms and methodologies that produce harm. Any questions about that before I go to the slide deck? Did that resonate? Did that land? Okay, sweet.
I am gonna move the table so I can
Yeah.
surface for my
Yeah, please feel free to get yourself comfortable. I might ask, for my videographer, is there a way that you can bring the lights down just so that the slide deck is a little bit easier to see? Is that gonna put everybody to sleep if we put the light like that? Can you see the slide deck? Okay. So just kind of starting from the beginning, I wanted to kind of do this dance step with you today of having you dream, but also having you think chronologically and linearly. So the thing that I want you to know, if reparations takes everybody, and it might even take everybody in this room, how do you understand what it means for Washington State to have its first ever reparations study? That study would start in 2026, and it has an 18-month time frame. So what do you think would be happening at the end of the study if we were sincere in our desire to have real remedies on the table? What do you think would be happening? What would happen next on our roadmap at the end or concurrent with the study if we were intent on the study having action? What are some things that we would be doing on our roadmap?
I think you would present some of the findings to our elected leaders, so they are aware of what the pulse of the community, what the community is feeling about the whole concept of reparations, and how they can reimagine policies for that journey to unfold.
I love that. Any other ideas of what should be on the roadmap for reparations if we were being intent on ending that 18-month period for the Washington State study with action? Would it help if I told you what the study was studying? Okay, so I do want you to understand that the Washington State study is unique in some ways. So its 4 topics are economic opportunity, and I actually can move us forward. If you're saying, Davida, this isn't the most accessible slide deck, I would absolutely agree with you. So if you wanted to see the timeline, and I try and facilitate in a way that is accessible, but if you open up your booklet that has the big R on it, it's the Reparations Roadmap Draft. If you flip it to the page with a timeline, you can see some of the initial timeline details that we're looking at. And Francis, I love what you shared about talking to elected officials. Other ideas about what would be on the reparations timeline if we thought that we were trying to move towards concrete action? What would be things that we would do? Lexi?
I mean, I think I agree with Francis. There would probably be some evaluation and like some share out, some sort of report of the culmination of whatever was found in the study. But then I would also think that some sort of like pragmatic policy package or suggested action, like legislative action by the committee or the folks conducting the study or both, would be presented for introduction at the next legislative session. So in my mind, if the study is to be conducted on government and policy, then part of that would probably also include suggestions to amend or change those policies or structures within the government, which would be required to be presented.
Sweet. Thank you, Lexi. So I have share findings with elected officials, look at a policy package of legislative actions or remedies. Other ideas that we think would be on the roadmap? And I wanted you to be able to hold it in your mind that we're kind of thinking the study starts in 2026 and ends in August of 2027. And just as a sidebar, SAARC commissioned our first harm study last year, and we're printing it or sharing out the final copy of it at the October 21st Reparations Leader Lab. We paid roughly just under $100,000 to do a study that was just for King County on housing and labor. So one of the things that's on my mind as a reparations stakeholder is we initially asked for $1.5 million during this legislative session to study the whole state. We were only able to secure $300,000, and that's to do 4 topics. So SAARC knows that we spent almost $100,000 to do just housing and labor in King County. So we're reflecting on the fact that we hope at the county level and the city level, like cities all across Washington, that there might be other groups that contribute towards the study, or that we're looking at how to scaffold the work. So we don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. A lot of work around reparations. I started you with those acorns to remember big things come from small things. Ideally, reparations would be coming from a federal level, but we are still making a way, like water, we are making a way in reparations advocacy because of hyper-local successes. The other thing that I wanted you to know is I'd like you to take all the print collateral with you. You can take extras if you like. But the reason why I wanted you to see Robin Ruth Simmons and her keynote from last year is because Robin was able to get $10 million for reparations work in Evanston. So they are doing $25,000 cash grants to Black community members that were redlined from 1919 to 1969. So they're covering communities during the Great Migration that were redlined in Evanston. So this is an example that we can hold up as a concrete example to Lexi's point around policy solutions that exist in the world. Every Black community, in my opinion, is pretty unique, even in Washington State. I don't expect Black Washingtonians to have exactly the same experience. So if you're Black in Spokane, you may have a very different experience from someone who's living in Pierce County, say in Tacoma, or in Snohomish County, say in Everett or Linwood. And what I also learned from advocating in Olympia is when you get to Olympia, I wouldn't say that people tune you out if you're from Seattle, but they are pretty consistent at pointing out that Seattle has a lot of resources. So we have to be pretty self-aware when we're at the advocacy table that Seattle is part of King County, and there are 39 cities and municipalities in King County. So that's why I leapt at the chance to be here in Des Moines, because it gets me south, and that's important to do. I promised you that I would take you through the slide deck. I did want you to know when you could connect with us again. So we are doing a gala on November 8th. That's the purple flyer. You have a very warm invitation to come to our Reparations Leader Lab on the 21st. We are going to have speakers, so you won't be hearing much from me. We have invited speakers like Dr. Tracy Hilliard. She's the researcher that did our housing and labor study. Again, we'll be debuting that study on October 21st. We're also inviting in national voices, so we're excited to have a professor from Northwestern named Dr. Al Tillery. Dr. Tillery is going to be talking about how reparations advocates are getting messaging out even during a time of political duress. He's also likely going to share 2 model bills that I want people to be aware of. One is a bill to preserve EEO1 data. It's data around, like so you mentioned you're in labor, but basically data to understand who, in terms of jobs and employment, how that breaks down by race. The federal government has stopped collecting that data, but if we were to do it at a state level and a local level, we could still preserve and make conversation that's important. What we do know is there are 320,000 Black women who've been forced out of the workforce since the beginning of the changes in our federal government, and that it's important to track that data, so that's one of the model bills. The other one feels close to my heart because we just lost Dr. Quintard Taylor, and he taught Black history very excellently through the Black Past. That model bill is around preserving Black history. So ensuring that even if the federal government is taking a step back from preserving Black history, that we're preserving it at a state or local level if people choose to take up that banner. So that's Dr. Tillery. And we also are inviting, when you all said everyone needs to be part, we're inviting everyone who loves Black people to dream about reparations with us. So we've invited Dr. Joy Hardiman, who's very, very loved in Tacoma and Seattle, and also Aaron Dixon, who's one of the co-founders of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. So those are just some of the speakers we have that day. We have a lot more, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna move on. SAARC both educates, so this is an example of us educating for reparations, but we organize and mobilize. So if you're interested in organizing or maybe even mobilizing for reparations, we do coalition meetings on the 3rd Thursday of every month from 6:30 to 8. An interpreter, you can slow me down anytime if I'm going too fast. I have asthma and I'm like, I'm talking fast, let me slow down. But the coalition meetings that are up next are October 16th and November 20th. We do 10 coalition meetings a year. So at the Leader Lab, if time allows, we are going to survey and ask, what are the 10 things people think we should talk about in 2026? And we have such a different flow than what I thought it would be like today, but just this was the part of the day that I was gonna say. SAARC was co-founded by Larry Gossett. Are folks familiar with who Larry Gossett is? Are there some folks that don't know who Larry is? Thank you, and welcome. You just got in, settle in. We have a pretty nice vibe going on. Larry Gossett was one of the first, welcome, come on in, welcome. Larry was one of the first Black member of the King County Council. And one of the things that I really enjoy about my job is that I get to cement the things that I know about being a civic leader with someone like Larry, who's done many incredible things, including helping to desegregate Franklin High School. In this illustration, Larry is with a really beloved and late labor leader named Tony Orange. And one of the things as an artist who's an executive director for a reparations advocacy group that I really love is thinking about what type of materials we'll create. So sometimes we use photos, sometimes we use illustrations, but I wanted you to know who was inspiring us to act. On a national level, former Congresswoman Cori Bush, my understanding is former Congresswoman Cori Bush is running again. She reintroduced H.R. 40, that is a body of legislature that has happened in DC to get reparations at a federal level. I am excited to tell you that just 2 weeks ago, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley had a roundtable on reparations in DC, and we were invited to it. I was really inspired by that conversation, and I want to see what is the way that we can have coordinated national work. But just taking a step back, did you all know already that reparations was a human rights framework? Were you thinking about reparations as civil rights or human rights? Just getting a sense of the body. You were thinking about it as human rights? Awesome. Was anybody thinking about it through the lens of civil rights? One of the ways that when I'm kind of just helping us hold the difference, when I was a little girl, I fell in love with Malcolm X. And one of the things that I learned about Malcolm X is that he was making the case to the United Nations about what Black people were experiencing in the US. And one of the advocates that I work with named Dr. Vicky, she and her husband Stan Willis did a lot of work with the Chicago Torture Justice Project. She often emphasizes that reparations has a human rights framework. So even if the US withdraws from the Human Rights Commission, we still can be focused on the human rights context of reparations. One of the reasons why I wanted to start with the UN framework is that oftentimes with reparations, you might hear cut the check, which I have no problem with, but I'd like the hygiene of, wouldn't it be incredible if Washington State and all of its municipalities understood how to apologize to Black communities? So what would truth and reconciliation look like if we knew how to apologize? The other thing that interests me on this list is satisfaction. I have a career that was built in public engagement and community engagement, and I think there's a really vital portion of reparations work that is around asking Black community members what would leave them satisfied with reparations work, because the fear that comes up with Black community members is, what if someone gives me a check and then I can't talk about racism anymore? Sometimes with reparations, there is compensation, like number 2. So I can give you a really concrete example of maybe being wary about cash. What if I told you reparations, reparations is common. So even for vaccines, if you fit a certain criteria of harm, you could receive reparations if you were harmed by your vaccine. But in terms of thinking about when cash may not be enough, President Obama issued reparations to our territory of Guam, or Guahan. And I read that agreement and my heart kind of broke a little bit, because I was seeing number amounts like, if you had a member of your family who was murdered, you can get $15,000. Or if you were sexually assaulted, you could get, I think it was like $12,000. And I was thinking, like, I have a lot of chosen family who are Chamorro, and I read that document and I reached out to them. Like, the person who designed part of the illustrations on our deck is Chamorro, and I said, oh, babe, we have to talk about what reparations means, and when is it symbolic and when is it restorative. Take a moment and look at the Jericho Rose. So just to orient, we've been using acorns and Jericho roses to think about systems change. So when we started with our Jericho rose, can someone raise the ones that are dried and that? So when we started, we were looking at like what happens when our systems are not vibrant enough so that everyone can thrive. And then we took a time to submerge a Jericho rose in water so that we could see what happens when our systems transform. And we were talking about reparations isn't so much thinking about what's wrong with Black people, it's what's wrong with the systems that harm Black people and others. I'm gonna move us along because I wanted to bring us up to today and some opportunities that I think are maybe really germane to the folks who are here. In the interest of time, I'm not gonna read you all the volumes of things that you could know for each of those, but one thing to know for economic opportunity is that the racial wealth gap between Black and white neighbors in King County is 20-1. A housing fact: white households typically have 62% home ownership to 28% for Black neighbors. Those are some of the disparities. And also I would say, because Black communities have been locked out of owning homes, not just in Washington State, but across the country, we kind of come in. These numbers are interesting because of displacement and gentrification in major urban centers like Seattle and Tacoma. So we're looking at I think a percentage where only about 30% of our Black community is multi-generational. And that is because we make it hard for Black people to stay here. A health fact is that Black life expectancy is typically at least 6 years shorter than our white neighbors. Black people make up 7% of our county population, and yet we are 36% of people who are incarcerated. You're welcome, please come on in. So these are some of the things when we think about levers of change. And I'm deeply aware that the one thing I know about my people is that we're a loving people. So I didn't ask your racial identities, but are there folks who identify as Indigenous in this room? Any folks who identify as Indigenous? How about Latino or Hispanic? We change our names a lot. My people have been called colored, Negro, Black, Afro-American. How about Asian? How about white? Middle Eastern? Each and every group that I named and more has Black members of your community. We're at the intersections when we're there, and this is where I kind of just wanted, for those who just came in, I wanted you to get the grounding example that we offered. And if you happen to be sitting at the tables, we did touch stations. So if you're at a touch station, you'll notice there are 11 by 17 sheets of paper where we've asked local Black community members how they imagine reparations. There's also QR codes with 10 facts about reparations. And our question was, we started with acorns, and we said, the one who plants trees knowing that he will never sit in their shade has at least started to understand the meaning of life. The work we're doing in reparations is definitely at least 7 generations of change, at least. So what we're doing, and the reason why we started with acorns, was to help people imagine, like when you plant a seed, do you dig it up or do you let it grow? You let it grow. So some of the seeds of change of reparations have to be planted, nourished, and grown deeply so that they can grow big, strong oaks of change and forests of change. The prompt that we started with were if we were living in a US society that had effectively done repair with direct descendants of US chattel slavery and ended anti-Black racism, what would feel different in this room? So for those who just joined us, we'll close out and I'll ask you for your reflections. What would feel differently in this room if you were part of a society that was earnestly doing repair with Black community members? I want to pause because this is a more intense image. Can everybody see the image on the screen? Can someone identify what this image is? Nice and loud. We can have 2 voices. You can go.
It's the prison in El Salvador.
Yeah, it's the prison in El Salvador. So we're living in a time where our government is not always honoring due process rights. We're separating families. We're kidnapping people. And for Black communities, those experiences go really deep. They go really deep. One of the things that I do when I'm doing that work of educating and organizing is, in weird ways, we use terms that can kind of almost be like red herrings. So sometimes when we talk about how we treat Black people in this society, we talk about the color of our skins. In reparations, we talk about how our government behaves towards people, what is legal and allowable. So I wanted us to be able to hold that contrast of living through governmental decisions where we're allowing dehumanization, but also recognizing this is also part of how our country is built. It is part of what fuels this country. Sometimes it's what makes the opportunity in the country. So I also wanted to do that for another different reason. How is your heart? Can we exhale together? Just breathe in. And then we're gonna breathe out. And then I want you to take your left hand. I'm gonna move us past these 2 images that are difficult. And I want you to take your left hand, put it on your heart. I want you to take your right hand and put it on your stomach. We're just doing somatic trauma-informed care, and we're just gonna breathe in together. So breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then exhale. Earlier when we were saying reparations was everyone, we're always together. So we're gonna breathe in together. We're gonna breathe in, breathe in. And then this time I want you to kind of feel like your left hand is giving just a little bit of love to your heart, and your right hand is giving just a little bit of support to you. This is a hard time for many of us. I don't imagine that it's easy talking about our government not caring about us. And my job is to make sure that we understand that, one, we will win, we will do some of the changes that are necessary, and that we can show up for one another. How are you feeling? I'm being mindful of time because we're gonna need to wind down. In reparations advocacy, one of the things, and I'll be honest, it was something that came up for me when I started this session, because we started smaller, and I realized for a lot of different reasons, raising reparations in the moment that we're in right now, for some people might seem off topic. Do you agree with me? Disagree? Do you think some people might think reparations might feel off topic right now? Like a kind of like not today, Ja?
I think people on the other side definitely would say that.
Yeah. I'm from the 2 communities in Chicago that recently had invasions. So South Shore and Bronzeville. I grew up in South Shore. I lived there until I was 25. Well, no, I lived there until I was like 19. And then my sister and I bought a house in Bronzeville when I was in my 20s. Looking at a city like Seattle that is, or Chicago that is extremely racially segregated, and the ways that I really struggle with trying to help people understand an intersection here, so just bear with me. In the US, when we have the racial category of Black, it holds everybody. So it holds people who are direct descendants of US chattel slavery, and it holds multi-generational immigrant families who are racialized as Black, and it holds people who have recently arrived. And we are not homogenous. And at the same time, we need to be a community. And we also need to think in ways that, have you heard the term that race is socially constructed? Have you heard that term what does that mean? I don't like ED words because I'm like, who's constructing it? What do you mean race is socially constructed? But I put this up because I keep seeing online conversations with Black community members that are saying, well, you're next. Like you haven't been supporting or helping and you're next. And I actually feel like that's a little bit like not quite lined up with how our history in the country has worked for those who've been here with ancestors who were enslaved. It's not that we're next, we just have experienced ongoing racial violence that has not stopped. And also, I believe that sometimes there is I don't want to say a blind spot because that's ableist, but like a dead angle where we don't always see Black communities as being part of immigrant communities. So we're intersectional. So if you're Afro-Latino, you have people of African descent who are part of your communities. There's also the Caribbean. And so that richness, like US society sometimes keeps us separate. If you are a US descendant of chattel slavery, you will not be protected by immigrant rights, and you will not identify as an immigrant, but yet we still need to find common cause with one another. The racial data from the last election. So the one thing that I would say as someone who's committed to beloved community is hiding in plain sight around racial relationships is just relationships. And have you ever heard the phrase, do you want to be right or do you want to be in a relationship? I think that's kind of binary. I would say, do you want to be in relationship and be in right relationship? So training for reparations right now, I would say it's probably not a good time to forget how Black people voted when we're experiencing ICE raids because it will polarize us. It might be an interesting time to ask, what if all communities voted the way Black communities voted to decrease harm? What would that look like and where would we be? I'm not saying we're not in an easy situation in our country, but that's just a question that I want to propose to us, because I was raised as an organizer, and I have organizers in my life who don't believe in voting. They don't think that they can achieve anything through electoral politics. And I think we're learning, like my friend had a grandmother who would say, ain't no sense like bot sense. We're learning when our theories don't work right now, and we're learning some things. We're learning by heart what has not been taught, as Audre Lorde would say. We're learning by heart what has not been taught. So our job right now, if we want better futures, whether it's with reparations, whether it's with immigrant rights, whether it's with health, education, economic opportunity, or communities of opportunity, is imagining what is it that we need to build consensus around so that we have better agendas. I have 15 minutes to wrap this up, and I'm going to do it elegantly. So I wanted to kind of give you a sense of what it looks like when Black people are thinking about building political power. Like when I think about voting rights, one of the things that immediately shows up for me, because some of the work SAARC does is mass incarceration, is for many people, if you are a felon, what happens? You cannot vote. And also, if you feel like even if I participate, I don't have great options, what happens? If you don't like the candidates, what happens?
Choose not to participate.
Yeah, you stay home. I know for myself, I only used to participate in national elections after I moved here in 2006. And the only thing that drew me into local elections was having Nikita Oliver, a local abolitionist and activist, run for mayor. And then after that, that actually really transformed my life. I was really depressed after the first time. And you know, we're nonpartisan. I don't want to assume that everyone has the same politics. But the first time Donald Trump won, I was so demoralized that I was looking for ways to feel like I had agency. And I'm so glad I had that feeling. Likewise, during this moment, I'm so happy that I work on reparations advocacy, because I didn't know how to go to Olympia and have power. What I also learned is Black people need allies. So we need Asian allies, we need Latino allies, we need white allies, because many communities know how to go to the Capitol and build power. And in some cases, like I did my family's genealogy, and we've been here since the 1700s. I'm lucky that I grew up in a family where my dad was a precinct captain, and you had better vote was the way my family showed up for me. They were like, you have better vote. I took part of the lesson until I had a local leader who inspired me, but we need to have a template where we encourage people to see their civic power. So the thing that I wanted to end on is a few questions. How many people might be interested in coming to one of SAARC's coalition meetings just to see what it looks like and feels like? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, sweet. So I'm seeing a good show of hands. The thing I wanted you to know is, thank you, every third Thursday, we meet on Zoom or at the Washington State Labor Council in Seattle. And the last thing that we're gonna do here is, I always get sweaty armpits when I have to do like audio, but if everything works, you are gonna hear footage from our last coalition meeting. We are doing something where we're helping people understand testimony. Have any of you all done testimony at the Capitol or at City Hall? Can you see what it is, Lexi? What happens when you do testimony?
Well, depending on the layout, most of the time there's a podium, there's a certain issue or a certain bill or a certain thing that's on the docket, and you are basically testifying in front of whatever governing body and whoever's watching, in favor, in opposition, or with information. additionally, and a lot of times folks and organizations will get asked to either come, individually testify as a citizen in opposition or support of something, or organizationally as subject matter experts to whatever government messaging brings.
Yeah, you made it sound so elegant. When I had never done a testimony until this year, and I've done public speaking my whole life, but it's so much harder when you have to squeeze it into 2 minutes. So one of the things that we learned as we educate, organize, and mobilize is that we must be intentional about helping people put their thoughts together. So what I'm gonna play for you is, for me, what I believe is something that will be historic archive work. So this is testimony from this year. So think about where you were in March of 2025. On March 2020, the March 25th of 2025, there was a group of nearly 100 of us that went to the Capitol. That was a big deal because we only had 2 days to mobilize enough people to save the Washington State reparations study. So it was hanging on by a thread. We looked it up and realized it wasn't in the state budget, and we had to do really late 11 p.m. phone calls with our local House Representative Chapalo Street to say, can you pull a rabbit out of the hat? Can you help us keep trying? And one of the things that we ended up doing was saying, you know what, they won't listen to us unless we show up. So I want you to know the reason why I'm recruiting you for the coalition meeting is I gotta have friends. Reparations stakeholders have to have friends, and we need to have people that we can call and say, you know any retirees? Know any students? Know anyone who's out of work who can jump on a bus? Who needs to be oriented? So just like we took 90 minutes today so that you could understand what it meant to be an advocate, we have to be able to do that over and over again so that we have a movement. So I'm gonna stop talking, but are you ready to listen and hear how the testimonies sound? So everybody just send good energy to me that I can get out of my slide deck and get to, okay, great. And then hopefully the sound is working. So just to line this up, the person you're going to hear is Shalee Seacrest. Shalee is the president of the regional chapter of the NAACP. Our power map says that to bring people like labor and maybe even the Chamber of Commerce to support reparations policy, we need to have a strong coalition. So when Shalee and I talk, it's with the understanding that in most cases, elected officials will say you need to have 100 groups across Washington State that are saying they want reparations. We also need to be able to show up in the Capitol and be persuasive. So you're gonna hear Shalee give her testimony. Are we ready?
ACP. I am here today to collect the check, as Martin Luther King Jr. so adequately said. Here to collect a check in the support of funding reparations throughout Washington State. I understand that inside of a deficit that you all have been challenged with trying to make it on the broken ends. With the rationale that if the funding goes towards places that assist with housing, education, and other vital needs of the community, that a rising tide will lift all boats. I'm saying that we need to fund the reparations study because we know that a rising tide won't lift boats when Black folks are stuck on the Titanic. We've got to do things differently. Fund the state reparations so that we can find out what is causing the faces of the bottom of the whale to look like mine. Again, NAACP is asking for this state to make a way and fund statewide reparations. Thank you.
Thank you. If we could please have come forward.
Sorry. Again, just for context setting, when we do this workshop, one of the things that SAARC takes seriously is archive building. I messed up. One of these days we're gonna look up and we will realize that we have reparations. And there will be a story. And because we live in a period of time where the government is erasing conversations about racial justice, these moments are important to remember and also inflect and to multiply. So you adding your voice to the conversation is profound. And also people like Andrea Kranzler, Kevin Allen, Larry Gossett, for the last 3 years at the MLK rally, have asked people to think about what would you say if you had to testify and give your testimony. So let's play the last clip. I believe the last clip might be me. And the one thing that I want to say is I went over. I definitely went over 2 minutes. I was saved because I wrote down my talking points. But I want you to listen to me understanding what would it look like to get everything that you want to say within 2 minutes. So Tarek, are you ready to play? And if Tarek's not ready, maybe we'll go to Nick. But can we play the second clip and then we'll get ready to start open mic and writing. Writing time first and then open mic to share.
Sweet. So I'm gonna pause it there. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to send you the Zoom from the coalition meeting. That meeting was really moving for me. I hate looking at videos of myself. I'm laughing because I'm getting videotaped for this workshop, but I hate seeing videos of myself sometimes. I have self-love, but I just get self-conscious. But the reason why I found that coalition meeting so meaningful is because one of our community partners, Suru for Solidarity, did a testimony. And what I love about Suru is a lot of my work this year was asking people to email their elected officials to support the study. And when I reached out to Suru on the first request, they mobilized 300 emails in a day. The second request, they did 500. When we say reparations takes everyone, I love that kind of love. So I was kind of like tearing up. I kind of want to take that video down. But I was tearing up because the way people shared what their testimony was for why reparations was meaningful to them was so profound. There was a father who said, my daughter's 6 years old and she's asking me why we haven't fixed it yet. Suru had two members, one who received, Suru for Solidarity is a Japanese American group. And again, they do really beautiful allyship in the reparations movement. Becca, the executive director of Suru for Solidarity, was talking about, hey, as someone who has been part of a family that received reparations because of the Japanese internment, I want to contribute my love and care to ensure that Black people receive the same. So we had, I want to say maybe 6 or 7 testimonies that day. I wanted us to wrap up this workshop, because I think we are at time, with you all thinking about, if you were to be asked to come to the Capitol, what would you say about supporting reparations? What would be on your mind and heart? So we started with heart. For those who came later, I'm trying to dot on my I's and cross on my T's. For those who came early, we did 2 things that were around thinking about how to make reparations natural and inevitable. So we used as our teaching tool the Jericho Rose, which is a plant that can be brought back to life. It looks dead, but it can be brought back to life. The way you do it is submerging it in water. So I think I'm over time, but about 45 minutes ago, we submerged our Jericho Rose in water, and I'm just gonna send it around so everybody can look at it. You can touch the water. In some traditions, that water is almost like water that you would bless yourself with, but you can touch it. So you look like you're like, no, you don't have to. Don't touch it. You can say, don't touch it.
You can touch it.
Yeah. Yeah, but I had not drank out of that water. You can. It's water that should be pretty pristine. But I wanted you all to see again the. Yeah. Did everybody hear Olga is getting green? Yeah. Yeah, so I wanted us to have time to close out with you all thinking about what would be your testimony. I wanted you to have the inspiration of the Jericho Rose of when we bring the waters of love to revitalizing our systems. What does that look like? What does that look like? And I also wanted people to know that SAARC very much thinks we do center U.S. descendants of chattel slavery, but we're also quite aware that the police are not doing a 23andMe before they shoot people or harm them. And so we have a mindfulness about beloved community, which means that we believe in multiracial democracy, and we think reparations is a win for greater society. So thank you for coming. And I would like very much for you all to write your reflections down. I have to report out to our team about how this went because we're getting ready for our leader lab. I did want to let you know that if you wanted to learn a little bit more, or if you know somebody else who might be good to send, our Reparations Leader Lab is October 21st from 10 to 4 at Langston in the Central District of Seattle. If you have a group that's further out where you might want to request the Leader Lab, we're winding down things for 2025, but we're starting to take recommendations for 2026. We're particularly interested in organizing funders to support reparations work. So in August, we do work with Black Leaders in Philanthropy. We do want to get in front of funders and other partners who can help us elevate the topics of the Washington State study. So if you work in economic opportunity, education, health, or around mass incarceration, those are the 4 topics of the study. SAARC also looks at housing. The only reason why the Washington State study didn't do housing is because we have some pretty profound legislation through the Covenant Homeowner Act that we didn't want to compete with. So that is a body of work that is reparative and done quietly. We have a partner at the IF Foundation who talks about people moving silently because of the political environment that we're in. So our partner, Timmy Bennett, talks about being woke and cloaked. So sometimes she says it's better to move quietly and be effective. And in some cases, you might be able to be loud and proud, but come to the Leader Lab to talk to us. Also, no one turned away for lack of funds. SAARC is doing our gala on November 8th, and I'd love to see you. The tickets range from $50 to, I think, $250, but if you know someone who just can't do that, let me know. We have comps. And everyone who's seated, they're all around in the chairs, there's writing utensils, so if you can just write down your closing reflection. If you had to do testimony about reparations, what would you say? And I'll share that at our next team meeting.